Well, welcome back, everybody. Boy, you can see the old channel name, the Tradesman Channel 2017. So, welcome back to another timber frame discussion. In this one tonight, we're going back to the woods where we cut timbers for a lot of that last big timber frame project. So these videos here, anything I've done in the woods, are usually some of my most highly commented on videos, and it's also where I tend to get the most viewer suggestions on what I'm doing wrong, how I can do it better, and how I'm going to die young. So we've tested these theories out plenty of times, and yes, there have been close calls here and there in the woods. Fortunately, I've kind of grown up doing this stuff. Not saying, I mean, I will never go on camera and tell you, hey, this is how you cut a tree down. There's a lot of different ways of doing it, and you do what works for you and what's safest for you. Hard hat was probably one of the biggest comments that I had on these videos for not wearing one, and here shortly you will see why that was probably good advice, especially the first tree we take down. Now, I got really lucky on this find with these timbers. I've talked about it before. This was an old dairy farm about an hour south of me, and the deal I worked out, I paid stumpage, went down, and I could cut pretty much any kind of pine I want. I paid $200 per mega board foot, which isn't a bad price. It's a little more around here. That's a little more at the time what the sawmills would have been paying for the logs cut and delivered. In this instance, I went to the woods after them. I mean, I was the tree cutter, the tree trimmer, the whole crew. It was just myself and the camera, which nowadays it's probably not going to be happening. I don't move as fast, so the days of going out there solo dropping trees, which is never really a good idea anyway, but those days are probably over. Now this tree right here brought me my first ration of comments, and I like to call it getting a ration of shit, you know. I had so many viewers say, oh, you should have bore cut that. That tree needed to be bore cut the way it was leaning. Could have barber chaired on you. Could have taken your head off. There is some credence to that thought process. Usually in a straight grain tree, especially a leaner, you do have a little bit more of a risk of that thing splitting right up the middle, right up the trunk on you at the hinge wood before it starts to go over. I've had that happen on trees standing straight in the air. Sometimes hickory and red oak is famous for doing that. So kind of have to be careful, be wary of that. I always, when I'm cutting trees, I tend to watch my kerf a lot, and I tend to watch pretty much what's right in front of me. I don't look up a ton. I've always found that I can see what that tree is going to be doing watching the kerf of the cut a lot faster than I'm going to be able to see what it's doing looking up in the air. And to me, that gives me a little bit more reaction time. So this one was a leaner, but if you look as it goes up out of the camera, it tends to straighten out. I was actually a little more, that top was a little more centered straight up and down than it looks. Otherwise, if it did continue going the other way, leaning out, a bore cut would have been definitely the proper method here. Now here comes the part we're going to slow it up into slow motion right about there. That branch just came down and just lanced itself right into the ground at my feet. At that point, that would have been a good idea to be wearing a hard hat just in case, you know. But the other risk of that, I could have caught it in the chest, the gut, the thigh. The chaps probably would have stopped it, but you know, just one of those lessons learned. In future videos in the woods, you will see I am wearing the hard hat, especially when I went back and watched this footage. Now this cut here brings me to another group of viewer disgruntled comments, I guess is the best way to put them. So I just carry the wedges with me, and I like my Fisker's axe in the woods. The handle doesn't break. It's perfect for wedging, things like that. But so I'd pinch the bar a little bit, and I had some guy say, you know, I can't forgive a guy who's going to pinch a bar in a log in the woods. That shows you don't know what you're doing. So It's like, okay, I guess maybe I'll just quit altogether now. I don't know what people like that tend to want to get out of it. But like I said, when you're going to find, if you're doing these videos, there are a lot better ways. We all think we know everything. And not too many of us are very good about saying, hey, I don't know this, or I try not to be like that. There are times I do come across that way, but usually what I try to tell myself is, there's a lot of people that watch this that has been doing this stuff longer than I've been alive. So I try to take that into account. But then there's a lot of other people who stayed at a Holiday Inn Express, they watched a YouTube video, and they saw Axemen, and that's just the way it is. So this tree was a beauty. This stand of pine was just gorgeous. That's why I didn't mind paying what I paid, because I could go in and select exactly what I want, and that worked out so nice. And these trees were a little bit close to the edge of the field for my likings. I've mentioned it before in many videos, I generally don't care to cut trees that are near the edge of fields, and that's more because of the wind and things like that tend to work on the grain and make things a little more unstable when it's coming off of the sawmill. You see that a lot in woods like poplar, hemlock, pretty much anything that's growing in a hedgerow on the edge of a field. I tend to try to go a little bit deeper into the woods for the stuff I want, just because it seems to yield me, in my own experience, it seems to yield me a little bit better timber. Now this tree here looks like I'm cutting that stump about 20 feet off the ground, but the ground drops sharply right behind it. So right in front of it there, you can see where that trunk of the tree is resting. It's not much lower than the stump. I do have a bad habit of leaving my stumps tall, and a lot of the reason for that being is I used to clear house lots here and there for a guy, and he'd always wanted me to leave them high so that he could grab onto them with the backhoe knuckle and yank the root ball out of the ground. It's kind of a bad habit because you do lose some usable wood, but I find sometimes I kind of like it a little better because I'm getting up from the root swell, the butt swell, just a little bit. And but I've also found there have been other times where that extra foot or two probably would have been handy. This tree was another beauty. This thing was gorgeous. The saw is not pinched there. I like to use wedges a lot when I'm dropping trees, just because to me it's just so much more controlled. And I find when I'm working in the woods, that control is everything. I've had one or two close calls in my life doing things in the woods. I was cutting an elm tree years ago, actually right out behind the house here, and it had a bunch of honeysuckle bushes in front of it. It was wintertime, the snow was about waist deep out here. I was working in a snowdrift. And I beat myself a path out of there, but there was no getting out of the way of that thing fast. So it ended up happening. It wasn't a very big elm. It only had about a 14-inch trunk on it. But what happened is when that tree went over, it got hung up in those bushes, and it swung the trunk of the tree. It kicked it back out towards my head, and it actually went up and over top of my head as it dropped over the bushes. So it kind of went up my right side, and it came down on my left side, barely missing my shoulders. That is a very humbling experience, I can tell you that. Very humbling. But so now I'm much more careful about that. A lot of times I'll clear stuff out in front of the tree I want to drop, especially right near the trunk, simply because of that experience right there. I mean, just so much can go so wrong so fast. And if you're like me and you work alone pretty much all the time, you could end up under one of those things with nobody to find you for a long time. Especially where I'm going to be going cutting timber for the next timber frame. It's remote. There's no cell service. You have to go quite a ways to get it. But fortunately, the trees I'm going to be taking out there they aren't nearly as big as these ones are. So this was another beauty. I ended up, I think, with two 16-foot logs out of this trunk before I really hit any substantial branches. And this one was probably the best logs out of this tree that I took out of these woods. And they're pretty good size. I think this was a 24-inch trunk, something like that. Somewhere in there, if I remember right. You could see when I dropped this tree, I get a pretty good hollow right in front of it that kind of held it up. And this is where I use wedges a lot. I'll get my cut going, I'll get it where I want it, and then I will drive wedges in to keep that thing from closing up the kerf on the saw. Now what I should have done here, because the saw didn't quite go all the way through it, I should have brought that saw up on top and cut the side opposing myself a little bit. And it would have been a little bit smoother. I wouldn't have had that bark stringer on the side that you're going to see in a moment when that thing came apart. You know, you do run the risk when you're cutting them like this of splitting that log. And that really sucks if you do that, because it just sucks because sometimes you waste some timber. But I have found doing the wedging like that, knock on wood, that I have never split one like that since I started using the wedges to keep that kerf open. It just kind of makes it a nice smooth cut. The saw doesn't pinch. Right there's where I'm talking about, that bark stringer. And you'll see one of the really nice thing, the property owner didn't want me putting big stacks of brush stacks around these trees. He just told me cut the top so they lay in the ground flat and they rot pretty fast that way. To give you an idea of the size of that pine tree, that's a 20-inch bar on that dolmar there. And it just gets through on the second log up. And here's the part in every video where I sit and I yak at you guys for 2 hours, it seems like sometimes. I used to get a lot of those comments, you talk too much. And then you get other ones, you don't talk enough. I'm finding that I just do my own style of video now. And not everybody's going to like it, not everybody's going to hate it. And I'm kind of always shooting for that in the middle type thing. I wonder what I'm talking about there. I'm probably yakking about all the progress I'm going to make on that timber frame, not knowing that a couple years later after this thing's shot, we're still going to be working on it. Jeez. That project was slow. And it was just such a big project, of such a large undertaking, that, boy, it took a long time. But getting these logs, that saved the project. That was my biggest holdup on that project. What held me up longer than anything was just waiting for loggers to drop logs. I mean, you could have the cash in your pocket. Call them up, hey, when can you get here with logs? Oh, I can be there next week. 6 months later. I waited 6 months the first time, 8 months the second time. And fortunately, and I had already started working on the frame. Fortunately, a buddy of mine knew these people, and they were phenomenal. These property owners were just great, and we left things on pretty good terms. I can go back and cut there again if I'd like. I actually found a much better deal where we're going. I can be even more selective. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. It's been fun yakking at you. This video's about wrapped up, so I'm going to wrap up too, and that end caption says it all. I hope to see you guys on the next one.